This is from Illuminati. I'm gonna tell you something. I saw her video the other day. I forget what the topic was, Dawn something or whatever. But there's something a little speculative about what she says. It feels like it's not super fleshed out. I don't know. Maybe it's just a bad feeling I get. But this is about Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, interesting guy. You know, I think he's a very smart, and this is why I wanted to watch it, because it's called How Jordan Peterson Became a Pseudo-Intellectual Hack. I don't think he's a pseudo-intellectual hack. He's very intelligent when it comes to him talking about like psychology, which is his expertise. When it comes to him talking about social issues, I vehemently disagree with a lot of what he says. He's become a little bit more radicalized. I think that he's a guy struggling with mental health, and getting canceled on the internet's not helping him. That could be a pretty significant mental health stressor. There was a time where he could have probably sat down and talked to somebody and maybe de-radicalized him. But unfortunately, that never was able to happen. That wasn't able to manifest. You know, he was all of his ties were cut. I think Ethan Klein could have done a great thing by doing that. You know, not that he has to, but I think it could have been a very positive force. But yeah, so let's see what Illuminati has to say.
At one point in time, Jordan Peterson was a well-respected clinical psychologist. His work and research analyzing different aspects of personality were studied internationally. With over 100 published peer-review articles, he was renowned as one of the utmost experts on personality, politics, and all cognitive psychology.
More like politics.
But suddenly in 2016, everything seemed to change. The once respected psychologist was now appearing on news streams, videos, and his own YouTube channel.
Yeah.
His past calm and mostly academic-type demeanor seemed to shift rapidly into anger and contempt.
I don't think so. I don't think he was really getting that crazy. I mean, there are moments where he definitely broke down, but since 2016, his initial fame was very calm. He actually did very well. A lot of people respect him a lot still. It probably wasn't until like 2019, 2020, maybe like 2020, 2021. Yeah, that's probably it, where he really started to lose a lot of respect because he started going a little bit crazy, especially with the trans conversation.
So what happened that made him so mad? Well, Canada passed Bill C-16, which added the words gender identity or expression to the existing legislation protecting people from discrimination. Basically, the new legislation protected people from discrimination by others like work or school based on their gender identity. It also added gender identity to the list of attributes that can be included when charging a hate crime. And that's it. But to
Yeah, I think he took it a little too far. I believe one of the issues he had with the bill, if I'm remembering correctly, and I may not be remembering correctly, is that it made it difficult for, I think there was an aspect, I don't remember if it was this bill or a different bill, but there was an aspect of some bill that outright banned, I think it was conversion therapy, which is a good thing that conversion therapy doesn't exist. Jordan Peterson's perspective, though, was that conversion therapy is already something that you can't engage in. And based on the language in the bill that bans conversion therapy, it's possible that like some kind of a clinical psychologist or whatever, or psychiatrist, whatever one it is, isn't going to be able to properly assess somebody with gender dysphoria, because there are some people who have gender dysphoria who their solution isn't to actually transition. Some people with gender dysphoria may not need to do that. It actually might be better for them. It's not most of them, but there are some of them. I've talked to like a therapist that dealt with this before. And there's like it removes the ability to suggest they might not be trans. That was argument. I don't know if it was super accurate. I could see what he's saying based on the language of the bill. I can understand that. This is a very complicated topic that like should be dealt with the therapist, and they should be able to do what they need to do. Then again, you have to make sure that the therapists are acting in good faith, of course. I think that was one of his issues with it, which is somewhat reasonable. I get it. But okay.
Jordan Peterson, this was evident.
Yeah, he called it a performative like measure, which if it's already something that's illegal is kind of a performative measure, right? So I believe that's what they're referring to. Land O'Lakes, 1 month subscriber. Hey, Papa God, love your content. Watching since 1990. What? That's when I was born. How are you watching since I was born? What the fuck? Okay.
The end of the world, the collapse of society, and the first of the four horses. Peterson almost immediately began to
He definitely went crazy with this. The whole, what was that person's name? that used to be a girl. Sorry, I'm not trying to be like insensitive. I just can't remember their name. Juno. Their transition, which was like an adult making a transition and doing their thing to be happy. Jordan like melted down over that. Started going off about how pride is bad. Blah 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 blah. It was a bit unhinged. I'll say that.
Your leading protests on the University of Toronto campus centered around the idea of freedom of speech. With Bill C-16 and surrounding legislation, it's the first time I've seen in our legislative history where people are attempting to make us speak their language. As Peterson drones on and on and on about the importance of free speech, chaos seems to unfold around him. Anti-protesters who had brought white noise machines had them kicked down by a man yelling, "This man is brilliant." Meanwhile, one rally attendee yelled, "We need more Michael Browns." The scene seemed to unravel with pushing
What? Wait, what does that mean? Okay.
and shoving in the crowd quickly and multiple people being separated by campus police. When asked how he felt about far-right people appearing at a rally that he organized, Peterson responded by saying, "It doesn't surprise me. All of this agitation and noise risks making the right rise. It's all happening, and why would that be surprising? For the first time in my life, I'm seeing young men turn to the right. It's not good, and there are people called out of the woodwork that you seriously don't want to meet. Not for one moment."
Well, that's a very reasonable response to have to say. Sorry, my wife just wanted to say something random, but just to point it out, it's often not actual mental health professionals providing conversion therapy, specifically for social workers. It's against code of ethics, and you can have your license taken away. Yeah, no, it was more about the language in the bill. From Jordan Peterson's perspective, what he had said is something along the lines that, like, based on the way that they worded conversion therapy, it even seemed to make it like illegal to have the conversation, which he may have just been wrong about like the person that has gender dysphoria not transitioning. Anyway. This is a pretty reasonable response. It doesn't surprise him at all. If he's saying it's not a good thing for them to turn to the right, but this is what's happening when you have like reactionary things like this happening. At the very least, it's like a reasonable thing to say. His point fundamentally is that when people go too far left from societal perspectives, people start turning to the right, and that's not a good thing. So it's not like a bad response that he's making.
And there are people called out of the woodwork that you seriously don't want to meet. Not for one moment did Peterson seem concerned that it was his rhetoric bringing these people out. That seemed to escape his thought process, and as time has gone on, he is still missing this point. While some of the stories about him seem outright ridiculous, like his apparent all-meat diet, others, like his verbal support or at least understanding of Russia's decision to invade Ukraine, are downright terrifying.
Jordan Peterson says pathological ideologies in the West are provoking Russia. Yeah, see, that's a dumb thing to say. This is what I'm talking about. He's going too far to the right. The reality is that the reason that that Russia invaded Ukraine is because historically they genocided a bunch of people in Ukraine, implanted Russians, and now they're saying, well, we have a claim here because we have a lot of Russians here. But like you see how that becomes an issue. You know, again, I mean, it's basically Jordan is going down like the alt-right pipeline. He started as a more like a moderate conservative, and he's just slowly spiraling to the right.
Support, or at least understanding, of Russia's decision to invade Ukraine are downright terrifying. So what happened here? And how did an extremely successful and respected professor become a leading voice to incel and far-right people and communities?
He got lost in the sauce. Well, we have a lot of young men, a lot of young incel men that are frustrated with the system, and I think that there are some frustrations to have. Like, you know, in our society, it's very difficult to find like a decent job and provide and whatnot, and that's generally the role of men. Has how it happens, and they're kind of just turning to places because a lot of times when somebody says, like, if a young man says, "Hey, I'm struggling as a young man," despite the fact that that is the prevailing narrative, is for young men to come forward and start talking about their frustrations and their struggles, we tend to shit on them a little bit and say, like, no, you can't have a problem. You're a man. You don't struggle, et cetera, et cetera. And now other people that is just kind of led the charge or allowed for individuals with more radical ideologies and notions to have like a very, profound impact and to be able to take hold of these people. It's just the sad truth, brothers. It's just the sad truth.
I don't speak perfectly, and my arguments aren't perfectly formulated, and neither are anyone else's.
True.
Hello and welcome to the Corporate Casket. I'm the Illuminati, and today we're going to be discussing the ever-controversial, mind-boggling Jordan Peterson. And listen, before we get started, I do want to make everyone aware that this is just some of the stuff about him. And I say some because this man has quite the list of things we could talk about, with many twists and turns, and covering it all would take hours. Now, before he was proclaimed a hero to the incel community by Olivia Wilde, which I know her controversies, I will get into that on a different day, but before that, Jordan Peterson was just your average everyday professor. He was actually well respected in the academic psychology community, and really, unless you were in that community, you likely never heard of him. But now, after he became an internet sensation with over 5 million subscribers, appeared on every right-wing news show known to man, and been banned from Twitter for misgendering and dead-naming Elliot Page, you've probably heard more of him than you would prefer. It all started back in 2016 with the passage of Canada's C-16 bill. Suddenly, he was everywhere, and the rally was just the beginning of it. YouTube was how he got his big start. Because if you scroll back years, all you'll find is some horribly shot footage of boring, normal, run-of-the-mill psychology lectures.
I mean, they're actually interesting if you ever watched them personally. I watched his conversation about ADHD, which I thought was, or excuse me, his perspective on ADHD, which I thought was very interesting. Very interesting, especially as somebody with ADHD, about like the potential of misdiagnosis and whatnot, and how like some young men are being misdiagnosed because they actually are just need to get their they need to get out. They're young boys and they have a lot of energy and they have a lot of aggressive energy and they need to get it out in like productive ways. And that since they're not doing that because we have a new age society that kind of keeps people in the house and whatnot, we're seeing a lot of young men act out with like these behaviors, which could be potentially cured by them just kind of going outside and like doing a little bit more and being a little bit more active, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was actually a very interesting. He's very interesting. He's a very intelligent person with a lot of what he says.
But then you get to 2016, and there you'll find the beginning of the end with a video
die.
called Professor Against Political Correctness, Part 1. The video starts off with a bang, with Peterson claiming that
Marxists, which in my estimation, by the way, is no better than identifying as Nazis.
Now, I don't know about you, but to me, falling in line with a certain theoretical theory and falling in line with a group of people that murdered millions of people is definitely not the same thing. The three-part series goes on and on about what he calls PC extremists, and
I think his point would be that like Marxists and communists, like pretty much every communist country is oppressive to the people who live there, and so that's why he makes that argument, right? I understand that people that are like, I'm communist, they look at the best of what it has to offer, so I would say he misses the mark in that capacity. But you know, that's would be his general argument here. This guy's obviously new to this dungeon.
And it comes with detailed slideshows and even what he calls a game to fight against this new politically correct world.
Identify an area of human activity, note the distribution of success, identify winners and losers, and technically it's a bias compression algorithm. Okay, whatever.
Basically, all of this boils down to one thing. Jordan Peterson was uncomfortable with the requirement that he should be addressing people with their preferred pronouns and blamed the fact that he was now asked to do this on, of course, radical leftist activists. So, does any of this sound familiar to anyone? Because I'm hearing some dog whistles here. Now,
so here's the thing. Here's the problem, and this is probably a way that you guys should try to operate in general with like everything, is that most people, and I would say Jordan Peterson is one of them, operates well-intentioned, right? I think that's the first thing. Most people do. Most people aren't trying to be antagonistic, right? Most people are just trying to be like they're people, and we have very different perspectives on the same thing in the world, and it can be very difficult to kind of flesh out the different things that we mean when it comes to different things. It's very difficult to fully communicate, right? But I think that that's very important. When it comes to dog whistling, obviously dog whistling exists. Dog whistling is basically saying something that can be interpreted multiple ways. One generally reasonable way, and then one way that's very extreme. Right. So an example of a dog whistle would be like when some conservatives talk about how we need to close our borders because we're having a bunch of illegals come in, and like, you know, and they come in and they change the what is it called? They change the culture of our culture, and it's like, okay, that a reasonable person would be like, okay, I get that. We don't want too much illegal immigration. But that can be a dog whistle for some racist conservatives that just don't want non-white people in here. And when they say culture, they're not talking about culture. They're talking about whiteness. So that would be an example of like a dog whistle, right? The thing is that, and I've been through this on TikTok because I used to make edgy jokes for fun. I'm not a racist person, you know, but I make jokes, and it takes a while to understand, and it can be almost impossible to understand that like not everybody is you. So I would make edgy jokes, and like I'd be like, oh, we're just having fun. But there are some people who thought I was like legitimately bigoted, and like, but I wasn't. And so that's like a big reason why my content has changed, is because I don't want to be perceived as bigoted, and I don't think that like it's easy to come to that realization, right? So I don't know that it's like an intentional dog whistle.
Part series would set the stage for the rallies to come, and soon,
Hey, Linda, how you doing? Hope you're
Peterson's
doing all
media
right. You fighting a cold?
This was it. He was now a
brutal.
leader of the free speech activists pushing against protections for gender inclusion, freedom, and pronouns, and he was by no means apologetic about it. To Jordan, Bill C-16, which once again merely put gender identity into a protected group in Canada's human rights laws, was a step towards authoritarian government.
Ooh.
He also made some claims that the bill would be separating families, which it wouldn't, but I'm mostly going to focus on dispelling the myth that his true concern was just about freedom of speech. And maybe for just a second, you can actually understand what he's saying. He doesn't believe the government should have a part in determining how people speak, and that I can understand. Free speech.
No, I think that he is very. I think that he actually is more of like a free speech advocate. I don't think that he was saying these things to be like, disingenuous or destructive in any capacity. I think he actually believes what he says, personally.
The thing, limiting speech is dangerous, and that's at least relatively reasonable. But just consider for a second that maybe the government wouldn't have to make all these anti-discrimination laws if people were actually considerate of each other.
Okay.
It's not a chicken before the egg situation. People are being discriminated against, so the government makes laws to protect them. It's not the other way around.
Sure.
But if you dig just a little bit deeper into what he's really saying, his true feelings become crystal clear. Because his problem isn't that the government is now involved in speech. His problem is that he doesn't agree with or understand the gender spectrum. He doesn't agree with the idea of gender identity as a whole. That's his real problem, not the government.
Yeah, sure. That is like the problem he has. He doesn't understand like trans issues or and he doesn't feel like he should be forced to say something. I'll say like, whatever. Now, personally, I don't see an issue fundamentally with the law. Well, I mean, like, I don't know. Out here, I don't think that we have any laws that force you to call somebody a guy or a girl. I don't think we should ever implement that. I think it's absolutely reasonable for a job to say you have to be affirming of something. You have to use particular pronouns or you're fired. That makes perfect sense to me. It's a job. They can set up like whatever limit they want to set up. I don't know that I would say that the government needs to get involved and start telling us what type of speech we should and shouldn't have. That seems a little bit disproportionate. So if that's what it is, I get it. I mean, I don't know the specifics of it. So I can't really speak too much onto it, but I can see where he's coming from fundamentally, even if I vehemently disagree with him when it comes to trans issues.
According to him, terms like gender identity and gender expression are apparently propositions of radical social constructionists that are being used to bully opponents into submission.
On Twitter, they can be sometimes. I mean, that's a whole conversation. But, like the social sphere, the atmosphere can be very toxic towards people sometimes.
In various interviews, he claims that the new language surrounding gender is dangerous because it's not naturally occurring. This is stuff that's being made up, as is the existence of non-binary people in general, apparently. But historically speaking, Jordan's wrong. The existence of non-binary people or multiple different genders other than the binary, male and female in Western culture, and
I mean, what he says it's made up. What I would say is it's like a social construct, the way that we talk about these things. So like it's almost the same thing. It's a human social construct. We made up fingers and hands too, but they exist. There's an actual exist. Like your hands and fingers exist. Bro, come on. Your hands and fingers exist, but what we label them is made up, right? And so that's what I would say. And that's why it's like a complicated topic to talk about. We are literally going to wipe. Holy fuck. Do we not have any melee to like interrupt stuff? Okay, whatever. Right? You understand what I'm saying. But no, I don't think it's made up. Okay, let me just continue.
The words used to describe them have existed for centuries. In fact, in many cultures across the globe, sex has been considered one thing while gender is another. This isn't really new. It's just apparently new for people in Western cultures. That doesn't mean that it's not naturally occurring, though. And that's the part that Jordan seems to miss repeatedly through his nonsensical lectures and interviews. But as per usual, it gets a little bit deeper than that. In one interview, when asked if he would refer to people by their preferred pronouns, Jordan Peterson claims that it would depend on the...
$10.
Hey.
Peace and blessings, praying gesture.
Hey, peace and blessings to you too, my brother in Christ, or my sister. All right.
Circumstances. But as per usual, it gets a little bit deeper than that. In one interview, when asked if he would refer to people by their preferred pronouns, Jordan Peterson claims that it would depend on the circumstances. Because to him, pronouns are not a form of identity. They are something different. Sometimes when people ask someone to call them by their preferred pronouns, it would be a quote,
Is that just a narcissistic power play?
which I just don't understand. Is it narcissistic to prefer to not be insulted? We all have preferred adjectives like not wanting to be called ugly or stupid or ways we just wouldn't want to be addressed. And this is
and maybe I'm being too charitable, Jordan. I think that I'm going to die. I think that his perspective in some of these instances is because there are some people who, especially younger people, who are identifying as non-binary, and it doesn't mean anything to them. They're doing it so that they can just be like included and whatnot into like a particular narrative. I'm not saying that's all people, but it does exist. There are people who don't have a genuine identity, and it's like it makes it difficult, obviously, to question them because, like, you know, like there's no way to truly know that. Anybody can lie, but we're seeing all over TikTok that people lie about different things like having ADHD or autism or this, that, and the other thing. People do it too in the LGBTQ community, and I think it's disrespectful to that community, obviously. So I think that's to an extent what he's talking about. Maybe it's not as fleshed out. Maybe he doesn't have like as much of an understanding of it. You could argue that he's not like super in depth with his understanding of what he's saying in that context. Like, you know, maybe I'm being too good faith, but that I believe is what he's speaking to.
Just one of those ways. So listen, Jordy Poo. Can I call you that? All right, Jordy Poo. People are not trying to trick you into some weird radical world where they control everything you say and do. People just want to be called what makes them feel most comfortable, and they just want to be respected. It really doesn't have to be this big nothing burger. It just boils down to kindness, and that's it. I understand when he says he doesn't understand, and that's okay. It's okay to not understand the inner workings of gender identity and expression. But
I'll say one thing. One of the things is that most people don't understand it. Am I gonna get oh my god, fucking the luck. Most people don't understand it. Even a lot of the people who talk about it, and this is one of the things that gets very difficult when something is generally more socially accepted. The reasons for its existence aren't really. It's harder for people to like communicate why they believe this thing is like a thing, because they've never had to question why it shouldn't be. Right. And so there's some people who, you know, don't really understand how to advocate for themselves when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it could be difficult for other people who don't get it to even understand in the first place.
But people aren't asking you to understand. They're simply asking people to be respectful of their identity, of who they are. As his colleague says, if you actually listen and you parse out the arguments, it becomes very clear that this is not about freedom of speech, that this is about reducing transgendered people's needs as excessive and illegitimate. And that's it. That's really what it boils down to. But either way, whether you truly believe that he's just against putting gender identity into the protected groups category, or that he actually is transphobic, his words resonated with all the
well, he's transphobic regardless, let's be honest here. Like the shit that he says spews hate. I just don't think it comes from a place. I think it's become transphobic. I just don't think it comes from a place where he's like intentionally being dishonest or he's intentionally trying to like, I don't know, grift or something. I think that there's like a genuine part of him who just doesn't understand.
People he claims to be against. With the passage of one simple bill and through the use of a few very long videos, Jordan Peterson was now a star, and oh boy, he ran with it.
Well, he really started to gain prominence way before that. I mean, that's one of the problems. This video suggests that he got famous for this, whereas like what the reality is that he was a rising individual for a long time for this. A lot of his stuff that he grew through was like kind of talking against some of the more, I guess you'd say, toxic, you know, feminist mainstream narratives, in some ways that may be considered a little ignorant, but he didn't blow up because of this. This is when he made like a pretty radical shift. I mean, he was on the H3 podcast way before that. That was probably like his real prime heyday, I would say, for a lot of his stuff.
Now he wasn't the boring, stuffy professor. He was a well-known guru rallying against identity politics, and he was going to be making some money off that persona. Soon, it wasn't just transgender or non-binary people that he was rallying against. It was everyone, or at least everyone who wasn't a straight, white, cis male.
If you're a man and you're trying to embody productive order, let's say, and you make an advance on a woman, the feminine, you make an advance on the feminine, then we'll say archetypally, and you're rejected, then that interjects a tremendous amount of chaos into your existence.
Okay.
As Peterson continued to amass a massive following,
be stronger, I guess, guys,
and shock people around the world with his antics when appearing on a wide variety of shows, he decided to take his
that was all before this, no? I feel like this was all before that, before the C16 thing.
Rise to fame one step forward by writing a book. 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos quickly became an international bestseller. The supposed self-help book takes 12 simple rules for living, including tell the truth, or at least don't lie, and stand up straight with your shoulders straight, and breaks them down using psychological, religious, and philosophical principles. And it sure seems simple enough. I'm sure nothing could go terribly wrong here, right? Well, about that. Remember the whole Jordan doesn't believe in gender identity thing? Well, he sure as hell believes in personality traits being associated with certain genders. And not because of, society placing certain rules on gender norms, but just because they're apparently inherent to specific genders.
See, this is the thing, is that this is one of the things, is that, and it's a really interesting conversation to have if you're not trying to forcefully insert rhetoric. But the reality is that we will never truly know where biology and socializing starts and ends with different things. Necessarily, there's never going to be like a specific definitive point of like, well, what is this and what is this? It's interesting because there are biological predispositions that cause us to lean in particular directions with a mixture of like social perspectives as well. It's interesting. It's cool. It's something that's fun to talk about. But there are general aspects to men and women where men gravitate towards some areas and women do the other areas. The problem is that then you also have like these social narratives that like will push women away from other areas because most women don't want to go in those areas. And then it makes it seem like that's not for women. And then there's also things like that for men. It's interesting. I know his argument is like there's legally women and men and women are the same. They could do the same things. So like he'll say like, well, what is it? What it seems like women want to gravitate towards these areas, which I would say is somewhat ignorant because like you can't really account for everything in that instance because again, then there's still like that social impact aspect of it. But like that's the general, kind of argument there. But
In his eyes, there is a crisis in masculinity, and his book and YouTube videos are here to save the day. Well, but
I think so too. There is a crisis in masculinity. But a lot of times people will say that crisis is due to like the LGBTQ community. The crisis in masculinity has a lot to do with people in general. And I don't even mean with men. I'm talking about masculinity. There's a crisis of masculinity and femininity. But like it's harder to get jobs. There are less jobs available. It's more stressful to be able to do a lot of we cleared this so fast. There is an issue with, Jesus Christ, I'm brain farting. There is a bit of an issue. I think a big part of it has to do with the lack of fathers in homes to take care of their kids, to be able to be good, positive role models for their children. I think that there's an issue where some traditional aspects of masculinity aren't understood. Like feminism, I think it did a good job of telling young men that they can express themselves and they shouldn't be shamed for that expression. But I don't think it did a good job of understanding that men express themselves differently. Emotions for women tend to like manifest in like sadness and crying, I think. And emotions for men tend to manifest themselves in anger. And it's okay to be angry, but we shun men when they get angry. And we say that you can't do that, but you can do that, but you can't get destructive. And so there's kind of like we missing the mark about conversations about that and stuff like that. Again, like the traditional providing with money. These are issues that impact women as well. There is a little bit of an issue. Truly, so, well.
My golly gosh. Now, for some, this came with raving reviews, but for others, it only amplified their opinion that Jordan Peterson might just be a tiny bit sexist.
But then that would be the thing, too, is that people could pick that up and be like, oh, yeah, see, that's a sexist thing because like they're speaking to what men can't be women can't be men, and then it usually devolves into like a transphobic nonsense.
Some critics have called the book and his other work simplistic, pseudoscientific, alarmist, and at times conspiratorial. And I couldn't have really said it any better. Order is masculine, he claims, and chaos is feminine.
Oh,
Society should be run as a patriarchal structure because men are just built to run things better. According to him, women are just naturally more agreeable, more prone to avoiding conflict.
Well, that part's true. Did he say those other things, or are you just asserting that he said those things?
Chaos is feminine. Some women are
Is that true? Does he actually think that? Hold on. Order. Peterson. Order is masculine. Chaos is feminine. I wouldn't agree with that. Women are generally more agreeable, though. Why is the feminine represented as chaos? He's a Q&A about this. It's really long.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third Q&A since I've been back in 2020 and 2021.
I'm wondering what he means by this.
The questions for this were submitted on ThinkSpot 1 week in advance of its recording. The video will also be published 1 week in advance or a few days in advance on ThinkSpot. So if you'd like to be in on it first, you can try it out there. All right, so away we go with the questions. First, why is the feminine represented as chaos? My feminist friends often question that part of your teaching. What is the archetypal role of women who do not feel inclined toward traditional modes of being? Well, we could answer the first question first. There is no archetypal role of women, or not a simple archetypal role of women who do not feel inclined toward traditional modes of being, because the archetype is the tradition. So that's a contradiction in terms, essentially. Why is the feminine represented as chaos? Well, let's throw something back at your feminist friends. Why is the masculine represented as order by feminists? I mean, let's address that question initially. So it seems to be a foregone conclusion that the patriarchy is represented with masculine symbols, and it seems equally a foregone conclusion that the patriarchy is order. So if the masculine symbolism is used by feminists themselves to represent order, what is left for the feminine to be represented by? Order? Well, that's already taken.
What?
And the reason your feminist friends object to it is, well, I would say fundamentally there's two reasons. Is they object to everything and they don't understand it and they don't notice their own behavior. So why don't you ask them, well, why is the masculine represented as order? And then there's a deeper answer too, which is, well, in some sense, I don't know. It's not me that's doing the representing. I mean, let's look at Taoist symbolism. The Taoists, whose ideas I am definitely not responsible for, and who represent an age-old tradition, represent yin and yang as the two fundamental modes of being in the famous dual Paisley symbol. It's actually dual serpents, head to head. Yin is feminine and yang is masculine. Well, why don't you get your feminists to ask the Taoists why yin is feminine? Now, the reason is, as far as I can tell, is that
well, yeah, but I don't think yin and yang, at least not to us. Like chaos is generally a negative and order is a positive. He said literally nothing the entire time. He's not making any argument.
Feminine challenges the masculine, and it challenges the masculine by throwing the masculine into disorder. And it does that primarily through rejection. And so if you're a man and you're trying to embody productive order, let's say, and you make an advance on a woman, the feminine, you make an advance on the feminine, then we'll say archetypally, and you're rejected, then that interjects a tremendous amount of chaos into your existence. The chaos that's
This is so dumb.
attendant on such a fundamental rejection. And that rejection may require a total rethinking of the order. Because
well, why is femininity chaos just because if a guy hits on a girl and she doesn't like it? Like, that's what he's basically saying is like, well, if a guy hits on a girl and she doesn't like it, then she's being chaotic. But like the implications there, I don't know if he's actually being really stupid or if he's trying to be toxic with this, because the implication there is that like in order to maintain order, women are not allowed to reject men. That's the implication of what he's saying, which means that he's unintentionally, I would hope unintentionally glorifying rape. Incredible. Okay.
Fundamental purpose of the order, at least as it's manifested by men, the masculine, is to be attractive to the feminine. And so if that's not working, then the order needs to be restructured. And then we might say, well, ask your feminists this. Are they calling constantly for the masculine to be reordered? And obviously the answer to that is yes, except...
Well, yeah, but why do you call that chaos? They're trying to reorder something isn't trying to bring chaos to it.
Insofar as they also wish to participate in it, which is something perhaps we'll get to later. They're always calling for the masculine to be reordered. And so how would you symbolize what it is that calls for order to be reordered if you wouldn't symbolize it as chaos?
Reordering? Order versus reorder? Like that. Okay.
So, you know, I guess I'm somewhat annoyed by this, by all appearances. I guess it's because it isn't...
It would be more okay if he spoke about the chaos in a more neutral or positive way, but he speaks about the chaos in such a negative light, and chaos already has a negative interpretation that it seems that he's telling us that femininity and feminism is a bad chaos.
Me doing this symbolic labeling, which is another thing that my critics don't seem to understand. I didn't invent these symbolic domains, far from it. I'm merely drawing people's attention to them. You know, and you might say, well, what's the evidence that the feminine is represented by chaos? Well, I outlined all sorts of evidence in my 3 books, and Carl Jung has outlined all sorts of evidence in his, 5th.
You're getting very upset. He never said that. He said it's explicitly in the Piers Morgan interview. Be picky. That's your own gift, first of all. Then, okay, so then what you're telling me right now is that Jordan Peterson doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about right now. What you're telling me then is that Jordan has no reason to classify it as chaos. This is, yeah, I can see why people call this pseudo-intellectual.
50 books, and Joseph Campbell has outlined all sorts of evidence, and Eric Neumann in The Great Mother, which is an absolutely superb book, which you could recommend to your feminist friends. Certainly Camille Paglia would recommend Eric Neumann's work because she's a great fan of his. So he wrote a great book called The Origins and History of Consciousness, which is one of the greatest books in the Jungian pantheon, but one that stands on its own, and also one that Jung said he wished he would have written in the foreword to it. So that's really saying something. And then The Great Mother, which is also by Eric Neumann, is a catalog of the symbolism of the feminine, which you could encourage your feminist friends to read if they would actually like to read something that isn't within their pantheon, let's say, but would add something incredibly extraordinary, incredible to it. I mean, Paglia believed that Neumann's viewpoint was the proper path that literary criticism and by implication cultural criticism should have taken in the late 20th and early 21st century. That's the path I took. That's the path she took, at least in part. It's certainly not the path that the universities took, because they took the path that is predicated on the proposition that our culture, the Western culture, let's say, is predicated on power, on the arbitrary expression of power as the fundamental human motivation, which is an unbelievably shallow and erroneous conclusion. If the masculine is represented as order, even by feminists themselves, and if feminists are calling for a complete revamping of the patriarchal structure.
Some feminists are. Most, I don't think, are doing that, but okay.
And how in the world can those same feminists complain, let's say, when I point out that the feminine is symbolized by chaos. Well, in their case, it's certainly acting as chaos. And the other thing I should also insist upon is that I don't draw a moral distinction with regards to the utility of order versus chaos. Order is the domain of what we have comprehended and control. And we certainly want to comprehend things and control them because we want things to turn out the way we want them to turn out. And that's the definition of control. But chaos is the domain that surrounds that, from which all new things flow, which is also part of the reason that it's feminine, because the feminine is that from which all new things flow, as well as that which rejects the order and selects. These are very deep issues. They're very fundamental issues. I mean, do your feminist friends also doubt the reality of hypergamy? Because that's the proclivity of women to mate at or up or across or up hierarchies of socioeconomic status. It's been well documented across many, many cultures, although it is.
The problem is that like the definition of chaos is complete disorder and confusion. So like when these words aren't used correctly. So even if I'm being tremendously generous and he's trying to say that the traditional structures bring order and feminism wants to bring chaos to that order to restructure it, which I don't know what he's saying. Chaos has a negative definition. It's disorder and confusion. It's not a positive in any light, and there's no way you could really argue that it is. And so this comes off as just incredibly sexist. But okay.
Just naturally more agreeable, more prone to avoiding conflict.
I think women probably are naturally more agreeable. But then again, that's also a standard that we kind of assert that women should be more agreeable, which is why when women like stand up for themselves, sometimes we call them like a cunt or a bitch. Excuse my language, it's a little too aggressive. But rather than when a guy stands up for himself, he's like considered a very strong, like a masculine man. And this is one of the ways that masculinity is an issue. We have an issue with masculinity. Women should be able to be masculine without being, disparaged, and men should be able to be a bit feminine as well, or if they want to be, without being disparaged as well. So,
and men, on the other hand, they've got this. They have all the necessary personality traits for leadership, apparently. I get the vibes of the whole women are from Venus, men are from Mars, which, to be fair, that used to be the science, but science has evolved, and these personality traits by gender have been found to be far less about biology and far more about society. An idea that good old Geordie boy just can't seem to
based on what? I don't know if that, okay, whatever.
Wrap his head around.
Because you could look at a lot of different societies and see like somewhat similar aspects, even historically, even if there are some differences. Like, for instance, I think in like Greek or Rome, they used to have like a something that was kind of like a gender for like young boys or something. But they still had like a more, patriarchal society and whatnot. It's actually pretty fucked. Because I think that was like part of if they had a strong man, it was like allowed to basically rape the young boys. It was fucking weird shit, man. I don't know if I'm like right about that, but I heard something like that. It's weird. But there's been general structures of like patriarchy, which doesn't mean that we should maintain one. We have like new technological advancements, and femininity is a very powerful thing in society. But like, sure. Anyway, whatever.
More recent studies have found that when we ask people about their personalities using measuring tools that account for implicit bias, otherwise known as biases that we don't even know we have, the supposed differences that Jordan finds to be so astronomical between genders were actually much, much smaller.
Wait, what?
Differences that account for implicit bias, otherwise known as biases that we don't even know we have.
Wait, how they account for implicit bias? That sounds like okay. It just sounds like I don't know if you can get accurate readings from that. Okay, whatever.
Smaller. Sure, science is relatively in agreement that some personality traits differ based on gender, but it's not nearly as big of a difference as previously thought. Like, literally, those differences are so small that they barely exist. And in some studies, these differences are so small that they're just seen as margin of error. But
in some studies, you can't just say some studies over and over again. But okay, sure.
I digress. Back to Geordie Poo. According to Peterson and his book,
like, I think again that there are social aspects, but some of these are like very narrative driven and overblown. And there are fundamental differences between men and women. Like, men have more testosterone, that's why they're generally like angry or more aggressive. Women have like estrogen, that's why they tend to cry a little bit more. Like, there's some pretty big differences. They don't have to exist. But like, this is the thing, is that like, I believe that you should be able to like basically be whatever you want as long as it's not harming anybody. But we've taken that narrative to like, there is no real difference between men and women. It's like, you could just look at men and women and be like, there's a reasonable difference. And then they'll cite some studies. Oh yeah, but there are some studies that did some studies did it. It's like, okay, what the fuck is a some study? You know what I mean? But okay.
The shift from a patriarchal society to a more equitable one has led to a catastrophic and detrimental amount of male suffering. They can't fulfill their roles, apparently, and of course, they're lonely. In an interview with the New York...
Well, see that, like, first of all, the roles are changing, so men have to cope, and they have to, like, you have to learn to just exist in, like, the new society. You know, cope, fucking seethe and cope, am I right? That being said, that again, there are some men that are struggling, and it's less to do with feminism. That's mostly just like people are like, no, it must be the women. The women are what's causing the problem. It's like a distraction from like the real problem, which is like class issues.
York Times, Jordan is asked about Alex Minasian, a man who drove through Toronto killing 10 people. Alex was apparently a self-proclaimed incel. And what did Jordan Peterson think about this man? Well, he thought that violent attacks are what happen when men do not have partners, and society had to find them partners to make sure this didn't happen again.
Interesting.
And I'm sorry, but what? So we're really going to say, and by we I mean Jordan Peterson, is going to say that it's women's fault that a man killed 10 people because he was a lonely boy.
Maybe. I mean, that might be what he's saying, sure. He might also just be saying that, like, men are lost without women. I mean, I guess it depends on your interpretation of what he's saying.
I've been lonely at times in my life too, but I've never thought about killing people because of it. And I find that really...
That's a lie, bro. I think about driving people off the road all the time. I just don't do it. Don't lie to me, dude. You've thought about it before too, guys. You think about just like, what if I just... You know? That's true. It's true. Just drive them off the fucking road. Sometimes I think about just drive. Like, what if I just drove off the road? You know? Just think about it. I feel like we all do that. I never do it though, of course.
Interesting that you would actually make the equation or to equate that loneliness in men is going to cause violence, but then try to turn it around on women. Because you're kind of proving a point that you're kind of saying men are inherently violent unless they have something to distract them.
Men are, I think, are more inherently violent, you know, for sure. And I don't know if it's distract them, but I think that like femininity definitely can calm down a man and you know, set him straight and give him a really good motivation to be a better person. That's my relationship with my wife, at least. So.
In which case, I'm referring to the distraction being a woman. So tell me again how if someone is bored that they're going to choose to be violent, how that person in your theoretical world...
It's not really boredom, though. It's a little bit deeper than that. Like, I'm just saying, like, it has more to do with, like, this deep lost feeling from, like, a young man. Again, like, what he did was horrible, but, like, just fundamentally, there are young men who are struggling to get jobs, they're struggling to find women, and they're becoming very angry. And a lot of the times, they can solve the problem themselves with a good masculine role model, but guess what? We don't have fathers in the house, right? We don't have fathers that are active with their kids. And so what you need to do is you need to learn to do simple things like shower, which you might be like, that's not, it's true. You need to shower, cut your hair, look decent, buy clothes that fit, do your laundry, you know, go out for walks, go to the gym is not a bad idea. Just engage in self-improvement, get off video games all day. They could be great. I'm playing video games. It's my job though. Like there's times where I just stopped playing video games because I had to work 60 hours a week. You got to do what you got to do. You know, don't let video games become your primary aspect of your life, but use them to strengthen your like to make it's good to have a hobby, and if it makes you happy, that's cool. But don't just don't let it become a crux of your life. Don't let it take away from like actual things that you need in life, you know? So, you know, be a good person. But that's the lack of like male role models. That's what I'm saying, bro. We gotta like, there's so much focus on like women being the problem in like the manosphere, and it's like, bro, what about the men that aren't in their fucking kids' lives? It's crazy. It just pisses me off, honestly. It's fucking nuts.
Is going to make a better leader. Wouldn't you want someone who's more level-headed? I know I would.
Yeah, I don't understand why it's interpreted as date them and not condition them to be dateable. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, we need to condition young men to be... That's what I'm saying. We don't have fucking fathers in the home. We need more goddamn to be... You know, we got to make these young men more dateable. We need to make young men more dateable. That's what it is for a lot of this. Because, like, there is a little bit more... You have a little... Like, you're expected to hit on a girl. That's scary, bro. Hitting on women is fucking scary. But you have to do it. And so there are some pressures that men face in society, like that one, that are different from like women. And I think that young men aren't really being conditioned to, you know, be up to the task of that. Because that's scary, bro. I remember being younger. I'm like, I wish girls would hit on me. But I'm ugly, so. You know? It's just the reality, bro. Fuck, I invited this guy. There we go. It's just the truth.
But that's just me trying to play around in Jordan Peterson's little nonsensical world. But that's apparently what Jordan is insinuating, and his way to fix the issue is equally as terrifying, because here's what he believes. He was angry at God because women were rejecting him. The cure for that is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerges.
Oh, well, I don't know what he means by enforced monogamy. This is the problem. Jordan Peterson uses words like such a fucking idiot. That's why people call him pseudo-intellectual. What does he mean by forced monogamy?
Give me your thoughts on the modern dating market.
Well, I'm too old to really have any thoughts on it in some sense.
Not from a personal perspective.
Well, I don't understand at that level of detail. You know, I do know some things that are happening perhaps at universities where there are far more girls than boys, or women than men. what happens in those institutions.
My wife said that's interesting. Should we condition our daughters to be more forwarded to their point of interest? That's a good point. Then you would be teaching young girls to be a little bit more assertive. Yeah, that's a good idea.
This is what it looks like anyways, possibly. So females are hypergamous, which means they'll mate across and up hierarchies, socioeconomic hierarchy, but competence hierarchy is really at the bottom of it. And so when you set up a situation where there's far more women than there are men in a given domain, say where mate selection can take place, most of the men still don't do very well because most of them are still rejected by women. But a small minority of men do extraordinarily well if you think well means unlimited sexual act.
The problem with this is that like generally speaking, there's just as many men as there are women, right? And this kind of takes this like general manosphere perspective of like a lot of women will gravitate towards the best guy, which is true. Guys do the same thing, and then when they can't attain the best, they gravitate away. So unless if your argument is like all these women want one guy, okay, but they all generally want to date this guy. We understand that women and men are different in that capacity, where women are a little more emotional usually. So like they're not just going to be sitting there, not like. They're going to like, well, if the guy won't date me. Like, that's why I say I've dated plenty of girls. And then, I was really just looking to fuck around. And they knew that, but they thought they could change me because women are stupid. And then when they couldn't, they settled for girls or guys that were, I'm not trying to be rude, like lesser versions of me. I'm not the most attractive guy in the world, but, I'm not a bad looking guy. I'm handsome. I'm tall. I have confidence. But because they would settle down with them. That's what happens. So, yeah. That's how kind of things will work themselves out.
Access. And so what's happening in the universities is that a small minority of men have sexual carte blanche in some sense. And most men are in the same position that most young men are always in, which is they're in a state where they're not particularly desirable to women. And then the women, of course, are terribly frustrated because the minority of men that they would really like to have long-term relationships with, they don't want to be with them. A seller's market for those men.
They're not settling down. That's the sex ratio hypothesis.
Yeah.
And the reverse happens, right? That you see whoever the more scarce sex is gets to determine the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. So the men, if they are in high demand because there's short supply, you get more short-term mating.
Yeah.
You get an increase in relationship dissatisfaction from women. And when the reverse happens, you get more dates before sex. You get more long-term mating. You also get more sexual violence in that situation as well, when there is a surplus of men and a scarcity of women. I think there's
also get far more unstable societies. I was pilloried a few years back for my comments about enforced monogamy because they were taken out of context and twisted in exactly the way that things like that get twisted now. But
because the term enforced monogamy sounds like very close to rape. That's why I'm watching this, is because I'm doing my due diligence and like trying to see what he means by these words, because of course they're going to be interpreted by people the worst light, because it's a fucking stupid thing to say. The packaging is oh my god, I'm just getting my fucking shit stuff. The packaging for what they're talking about is just, it doesn't, why would you say it unless he literally just means forcing people to be monogamous. But yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that one human universal is the construction of societies to both mandate and reward monogamy. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. It's because it's the best long-term solution fundamentally. But one of the reasons for that is that when women are scarce, men get violent. Now, that was read to say, well,
we don't have like a scarcity issue with women, so like we don't have to really worry about that problem there. But okay.
Thought that the society should be distributing women to undeserving men, which is of course absolutely utterly preposterous and bears no relationship whatsoever to anything I ever said or thought.
It sounds like
anyone sane would ever think or say, or has ever thought or said. Because I don't know anyone politically ever who was insane enough to think that the state should distribute women to men. Like that's just never happened.
Hey.
So to be accused of that belief and then for that to be put forward as a credible representation of what I thought was just one of the preposterous things that has happened.
Even in his example here, he doesn't do a very good job distinguishing what he means. He was talking about so incentivizing monogamy is a great idea, right? You incentivize monogamy like what we do right now. If you get married, guess what? You get tax benefits, right? That's a great way to incentivize monogamy, right? But at the same time, mandating it, like I'm assuming what's the definition of a mandate? Because when I hear a mandate, I hear force, but I think a mandate is just like some kind of thing. You understand what I'm saying? Mandating something is more, I guess, like implementing some kind of law about it. But like, yeah, these things come off as like so disconnected when he talks about these things. Fuck. Wow, I'm just fucking cycling through these things. The mandate, it just comes off as so weird when he says it like that. And so, like, even here, he's so bad at communicating himself. This is the problem, is that your best assertion of Jordan Peterson is that he is such an intelligent guy that he becomes stupid. He doesn't know how to talk to people that don't understand what he's saying. He's a really bad communicator. That's the best argument that you have with Jordan Peterson, because he is a dog shit fucking communicator. I mean, holy fuck. If most people are getting this idea of what you're saying, but I'm sorry, maybe you should try to restructure how you say things, because clearly you're not doing a very good job in your communication. And if your goal is to communicate, then why aren't you trying to be better at the communication? Like, I talk about this all the time. I worked with some Hispanic guys a while ago, right? Back in the day, they were like some people. They were really good workers, but like there was a language barrier. And there was some language that I would use that they wouldn't understand. It's not because they're fucking stupid. They're very smart. It's just because there's a language barrier. So I would speak in a way that they would understand what I was saying. Not to be disrespectful, but to be respectful. I wanted them to talk to me. They were good. They were good people to talk to. I wanted to communicate the job I needed them to do. But then also we would hang out and we would chill. We would get pizza sometimes. We'd all fuck around, you know? So this is like, you have to be good at communicating. This is why like people like Joe Rogan are popular, because he's a generally smart guy. He's smarter than the average person. But like he also doesn't communicate in like these massively like intellectual ways. Like he knows how to talk to people, the common people, and common people are like, oh, cool. That's it. Like learn how to communicate, because what he's saying is just so fucking stupid.
To me, it's an unfortunate name, enforced monogamy, because it's a term from anthropology, right? But what you mean is culturally celebrated monogamy. Culturally,
there you go.
That's norms that are supporting people and raising that up as an institution.
supporting and punishing, both, but mostly supporting. I mean, the punishing is that there's a moral disapproval applied to, say, cheating, right? To adultery, to
see, he just doesn't know how to fucking speak. Oh, like that's a punishment. Like no, but like it is, but like not in the way that we would traditionally think. So when he says there should be a punishment for non-monogamy, what do you get out of here? You get like, oh my god, this guy wants fucking people to get hurt if they're not monogamous. That comes off as like a forced narrative. He's so bad at communicating, and it's so incredibly unreasonable to expect people to get down and dirty into the hyper specifics of what he means by every little thing that he says in general. That's so unrealistic. I mean, if he's having a consistent problem of being taken out of context, then maybe he needs to learn to communicate in a better way, because holy fuck. Like listening to Jordan talk about these things is insane. Like he really needs like an exercise in communication. It's fucking nuts. Oh my god, these guys really just left us here, you fucking idiots. Holy shit.
Especially running around behind your partner's back if you're married, particularly that. But even if you're in a long-term stable relationship, it's like, well, that's all enforcement. It's not police with jackboots, but that's not the only type of enforcement. It's not the only type of sanction or threat or punishment or disappropriation or disgust or contempt or shame or frustration or disappointment. All of those things. And all of that, because monogamy is a good long-term solution, but in some sense a troublesome short-term solution, if you have other options, then all of those elements of social support, let's say, need to be put into place. And that is it, as far as I've been able to determine by looking at the anthropological literature. Norms surrounding monogamy are a human universal. There are exceptions, but there are very specific situational reasons for those exceptions.
What's happening?
Okay, well, there we go. We got our answer there. Cool.
So today's
wrong button. All right.
Now, Jordy Poo goes on to explain that enforced monogamy was needed because otherwise women would only pick high-status men and then no one's happy. Half the men fail, and no one cares about the men who fail. So, yeah, in a weird twist of events, forced monogamy is apparently what's going to save men. And that doesn't sound like it could have disastrous consequences at all. Or, I don't know, put women in hyper-dangerous situations. But
I don't know. I truly don't know if I should be criticizing this content creator for not doing her due diligence to try to get the context of what he was saying, versus criticizing Jordan Peterson for saying saying shit that's very easily misinterpreted. There's some line in the middle where this content creator should have, like, I did a quick Google search while watching this, and I came up with, oh fuck me, dude, this is gonna fucking shit on us. I did a quick Google search while I was watching this, and I was able to figure out the context of what was going on here. But at the same time, he says some very sussy things, but like I don't know where, I don't know which I should be more critical of, to be honest with you. But it just all seems kind of wrong, no?
What do you expect from a man that found absolutely nothing wrong with marriages in the 1950s, where women were often barred from working, making money, or
When did he
buying
say that?
anything for themselves? To
You show-
him, anyone who complained about that way of living was just whiny, particularly
Can you
Betty Friedan, who
Can you show me where you said that? I'm just curious. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for that. Why would you run on top of me with a fucking AOE, you idiot? Where did he say that?
wrote what has become known as the Feminist Manifesto, The Feminine Mystique.
Okay.
Apparently, women in the 1950s had comfortable, secure lives because, yeah, we're just going to ignore the mountains of evidence that women were horribly abused at astronomical numbers back then. Anyone that complained
Well, I don't know if it was astronomical. Yeah, women did probably have more comfortable lives, but the problem is that, and I would assume a good amount of them were probably pretty happy with it. But the problem is that it sets people up for such a dangerous power dynamic that people could get horribly abused, and that's the biggest issue. And then women are like, nah, fuck this shit. We don't want to be held to these particular areas. But what did Jordan Peterson say?
was apparently just bored. He says, it's like, Jesus, get a hobby, for Christ's sake.
So I don't know who these people are. I think marriages are oppressing, he says. I think I read Richard's book because I was very curious about it, and it was so whiny. It's just enough to drive up around a person mad to listen to these suburban housewives in the late 50s, incensed with their uncomfortable lives, complaining about how the fact that they're bored because they don't have enough opportunity. It's like, Jesus, get a hobby, for Christ's sake. Yeah, doesn't sound good. I would have no idea how to find the context of what he's saying. But yeah, that definitely does not sound good.
So yes, great solution to not being able to work and having your entire life controlled by another person. Thank you so much.
Based.
Now, when he isn't talking about forced monogamy or just the terrible life of incels that we should feel so bad for, he's trying to convince us to feel bad for the people that sexually harass women. Because to him,
What does that
we should
mean?
also have some sympathy.
Oh,
It's not their fault. And that's right, babes.
mean?
It's that damn makeup. Because in an interview discussing sexual harassment in the workplace, Jordan Peterson says that men and women can't feasibly work together. Not only does he say that, but he says it will take more than 40 years for men and women to be able to work together without sexual harassment. When asked about a solution, he says,
Like, what? Here's a rule.
Don't
How about
you-
no makeup in the workplace?
because it is, quote, sexually provocative. He continues on to say that women wear lipstick and
I've seen a little bit of that. It is probably generally sexually provocative. The thing is that's one of those things where it comes down to like teaching men to be better, you know? So you would say like, yeah, maybe it is, but you're a grown man. You have the ability to control yourself, and you don't have to fucking like, because this is the problem. Is if you look at it logically, he's probably right. Doing things like red lipstick, like red is usually like a sexually triggering thing for men to see. It probably is something. And if women stopped wearing makeup in the workplace or stopped looking nice, then men probably wouldn't sexually harass them as much. The reality, though, is that why is the solution to stop women from being happy just so that we can control men? Whereas the real solution should be like to teach men that just because they're horny doesn't mean that they should be able to act on that in any way. That like you're not a degenerate animal, and you don't need to fuck everything that exists. That you could like keep it together, keep it in your fucking pants, and you get your shit together, right? Like that's one of the problems I have with some of these dynamics, the way that we teach men versus women. Is like men aren't animals; they can control themselves, and a lot of times I feel like we just advocate or speak in a way where they are animals, and I think that's demeaning to men.
And I really wish I was kidding for what I'm about to say, but dead serious. He claims that women wear lipstick because lips turn red during sex, so it means that she's
Super
aroused by
Chatty $2, Alliance or Horde. Love you, bro. Long time viewer.
Oh fuck me, dude! I just went right to there. Holy fuck. It doesn't really matter in the current thing. You could play with whoever you want. Fuck, I just literally did like a bad thing.
the male's present lipstick. And I really wish I was kidding for what I'm about to say, but dead serious. He claims that women wear lipstick because lips turn red during sex, so it means that she's aroused by the male's presence or wants him to be aroused by hers.
I mean, maybe historically that's where it came from, but that doesn't actually matter, right? We should understand that doesn't mean anything. Just because historically that's a thing doesn't mean that like we need to uphold. Fundamentally, people dress nicely because it makes them feel better about themselves. And yeah, the reason is because they know they can go out and people will be like, "Oh, you look good," but that doesn't mean that it justifies like unwarranted responses. You know, like it doesn't mean it justifies like sexually harassing women, right?
I'm sorry. I really tried to say that with a straight face. You have no idea how many times I had to record that line. I just said, fuck it. I'm just going to kind of smile and laugh through this because it's so absurd. Basically, his comments amount to if a woman wears makeup or even high heels in the workplace and then gets sexually harassed, that she asked for it. And there it is.
Maybe. I don't know if I could say that for certain. That might just be your interpretation of what he's saying. And we've seen that just Jordan does not know how to communicate with people very well. So that might not actually, I don't know if that's what he's necessarily saying. It could be. I don't know. I'm a little hesitant about that.
Dreaded, she asked for it. Now, this unfortunate list goes on and on for Jordan about how feminism, women gaining more equality or freedom, and sexual choice has been detrimental to men. But as it turns out, it's not just gender equality that Jordan seems to despise. It's racial too. Yeah, who would have ever guessed?
What?
It is much harder to actually deal with the fact of the sometimes unjust distribution of privileges and resources in a complex society than to kowtow to radicals who know how to viciously accuse, weaponize guilt, and claim through manipulative sloganeering the moral upper hand.
It's a bird. It's a plane. It's
Sorry, I don't really even understand what he said.
quality that Jordan seems to despise. It's racial too.
Don't know.
Yeah, who would have ever guessed?
It is much harder to actually deal with the fact of the sometimes unjust distribution of privileges and resources.
Okay, so it can be difficult to deal with potential unjust distribution of resources
In a complex society,
In a complex
than to
society.
kowtow to radicals who know how to viciously accuse, weaponize guilt, and claim through manipulative sloganeering the moral upper hand.
It's a bird.
It sounds like what he's saying is that dealing with actual oppression, it can be more difficult than the way that some people pretend that they want to deal with oppression. That doesn't sound racist to me. It just sounds like a normal. Well, how are we fucking dying? This is insane. This is a fucking +5. What the fuck? What are you kidding me? Wait, can I res this guy? Oh, res him. I don't know.
It's a plane. It's critical race theory. Ooh, and it's coming for us. Just kidding. We're all gonna be okay. But to some people, I don't know, like Jordan Peterson, critical race theory is a very spooky thing. First off, let me just break down CRT for some of you that may just know it as the super scary way of teaching American.
One of the biggest problems with the critical race theory is I don't know what the fuck it is, and no one's actually like, there doesn't seem to be like a definitive aspect of it. If critical race theory is just teaching people about systemic racism, I think that's a great, fine idea. Sometimes they might take it a little too far. I don't really know. One of the problems, though, is when you ask people what it is, a lot of progressives don't really seem to know what the fuck it is, especially when it comes from like a learned perspective, like when it comes to implementing that in the law, you know? And so, sure, okay.
In history too, your children. But here's what it really breaks down to. Critical race theory is usually a high-level class usually taught in law school or maybe other graduate programs that explore how the law, political movements, media, and other social structures are shaped by race and ethnicity.
Right, but we're talking about teaching this to like younger people. So there's like, I feel like they're definitely
9 billion super chatted $1.99.
Oh my goodness.
Silly time.
Silly time, brother. I feel like there is a little bit of an apprehensiveness to teach young people about critical race, potentially like super complicated race narratives in a way that doesn't like either generate some guilt by like white people just for their existence of being white, or generate a victim complex in people of color. Right? I'm not saying that there isn't something to be frustrated about, because there definitely is, but there's a fine line between acknowledging particular issues in the past versus like allowing you to create like a victim narrative on it. And for young people, it might just create the perfect concoction to make them feel like every problem in the world isn't their fault, or rather nothing in their lives has any level of control, and everything is the system's fault and they can't really change it. So that can be a really difficult thing. How are we, dude, what the fuck is happening here? That's, I think, one of the worries that people have.
Barbarian_babe super chatted $10. In Spain, women are topless on the beach and wear more revealing clothing. No one cares as much. It's not as sexualized.
I'm going to Spain. I'm going to Spain. I'm going to Spain without the S, guys.
In fact, 99% of the time, critical race theory puts the most emphasis on the outcomes of racism in social structures, not on individual people. So the whole "they're telling white kids they're racist" thing is kind of bullshit. But to Jordan and many others like Chris,
unfortunately, some of the public narrative can be to blame white people for these problems, even though, you know, white people are white, and, you know, I'd say we benefit from the system, but that doesn't mean that we created it, because I wasn't alive.
For Rufo, who appeared on Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel, critical race theory is very dangerous. This became readily apparent when Peterson came out with yet another YouTube video debating a new law in Canada. This time, it was Bill 67, which addressed racial inequality in Canadian schools by requiring racial equity training and allowing for repercussions against a person who disrupts or attempts to disrupt proceedings of a school or class through the use of racist language or activities. Now, that seems pretty simple, but to Jordan...
I'm going to be real here. There's probably a lot more to that bill that this content creator doesn't go into. And just based on how the way that they've kind of talked about some stuff, I'm not going to go and read through the bill. I'm just a little apprehensive about the way that they're displaying this situation. Look at play.
It was so much more than that, because isn't it always? A warning to citizens of Ontario and Canada, Bill 67, which purports to be nothing but an anti-racist bill, is in fact the most pernicious and dangerous piece of legislation that any Canadian government has attempted to put forward. That's the beginning of the letter that he wrote to his fans and, of course, the nation of Canada regarding the new bill. The 5-minute YouTube video goes on to dispel the same myths that we hear about critical race theory over and over. It claims it's a radical leftist doctrine which strips anyone who is white of any innocence. Basically, Jordan Peterson did his typical thing, used big words and fancy academic-leaning rhetoric to say the same thing that people on the alt or light right have been saying all along. He just made it sound a little prettier. But it's really not shocking that he would be adamantly against any bill that accounts for racism in schools and pushes towards training in anti-racism, considering what he's said about things like it in the past. I mean, to him, white privilege is a Marxist lie, and considering how he feels about Marxism, that makes the idea inherently dangerous, at least in his eyes. Now, white privilege doesn't mean you got everything perfect in your life, just because you're white or that your life can't be hard as a white person. It just means that you haven't been systematically stopped from getting things or experienced horrific treatment from society because of your skin color. That's it. Then there's the video with Christopher Rufo, who you may know as one of the key people in the anti-CRT movement in the United States. It's 1 hour and 30 minutes long, by the way, and through their conversation, Christopher discusses the background of critical race theory, which he says started out with Derek Bell's identity politics and radicalized theory that they plan to implement in any and all structures. Now, of course, Rufo reinforces Peterson's idea that critical race theory is that every radical leftist way of thinking, and it's heading towards one key goal: limiting free speech. In fact, Rufo says theorists are calling for a specific state government to enforce speech limitations. At least they do admit that these things are not totally bogus. People have rationalized horrific treatment of groups and oppression to keep power, and there is definitely a history of racial injustice. But it's just not that simple, apparently. According to Christopher Rufo, it's not fair to look at the institutions of the United States through the lens of oppression because we have apparently taken steps to make it better. He then goes on to list the Declaration of Independence as a thing that apparently made things better in terms of addressing racial inequality. You know, the one written by Thomas Jefferson, who owned multiple slaves and didn't consider black people to be people. I don't think that's the step forward you think it is. Obviously, I don't have all the time in the world to sit here and discuss in extremely specific detail all of this, but it will be in my source list if you want to take a look for yourself. Now, over and over, Jordan Peterson has attacked any term that he believes to be developed by the so-called radical left and seems to lack a deep understanding of society or the theories themselves. But that doesn't stop people from listening.
I don't know if that's true necessarily. I should watch that video that she showed us about Jordan Peterson's thing.
To and following him, and the type of followers he seems to attract have certainly raised more than a few eyebrows. For the record, I don't actually think Jordan Peterson is alt-right, and neither do I believe he himself could be considered.
Well, that doesn't make sense, though, because you said that he was dog whistling. So if you think that he's dog whistling, then you think he's alt-right. What are you talking about? That doesn't even make sense. You don't think he's alt-right. You said that he was dog whistling. Dog whistling is intentional. You think it was an unintentional dog whistle? I mean, if it was, you would say, I think it was unintentional dog whistling. But you explicitly said you think he's dog whistling. So what are you talking about? You can't really make that assertion.
Considered an incel. Do I think that he has become a dangerous pipeline for people to find these groups and resonate with them? Yes. And
Maybe, but these are two different things. For you to say, like, I think that some of the things that he says can very easily be taken out of context and, you know, lead to some less than stellar ideological choices. I think I can agree with you on that. But you said he was dog whistling, and that's generally comes with it being an intentional dog whistle. So I don't know if that's actually your position or you're just pretending to be reasonable at this point.
You think that he has given a certain sense of confirmation to these groups? Absolutely, I do. And I'm not the only one. David Newart, author of Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump, wrote, "It's true that he's not a white nationalist, but he's buttressing his narrative with pseudo-facts, many of them created for the explicit purpose of promoting white nationalism, especially with the whole notion of cultural Marxism. The arc of radicalization often passes through the radical right in the Age of Trump wrote, "It's true that he's not a white nationalist, but he's buttressing his narrative with pseudo-facts, many of them created for the explicit purpose of promoting white nationalism."
Wait, so you can't say that you don't think he's a white nationalist while he's intentionally creating rhetoric that would suggest, that would give justifiers to white nationalism. That doesn't make any sense. He would be a white nationalist then. What the fuck, bro? These things are going back to me. Okay.
especially with the whole notion of cultural Marxism. The arc of radicalization often passes through these more moderate ideologues. So yeah, just because you're not technically part of the group doesn't mean you don't have the same issues happening. Using their rhetoric is still awful, and Peterson has been doing this more and more as time has gone on. But beyond his transphobia, sexism, and apparent misunderstanding of racial inequity, there's something else more recently that's also caught the public's eye: Jordan's comments about Russia. And before we take a look at his apparent approval of the Russian invasion against Ukraine, the explicit purpose of today's sponsors. So hello, it is I doing an ad read for myself. In case you are unaware, I am doing a very sudden flash sale on my merch site, which I know I don't really talk about it too often, but I do in fact have merch. It's multilevelmerch.shop. It'll be in the description box if you'd like to check it out. Use code DARKDIVES to go ahead and receive, I think it's 25% off the entire site. I'm going to be taking the site down for about a month after this sale ends so that I can revamp it and get some new designs up there and just kind of change the overall look and feel. So again, make sure to go to multilevelmerch.shop and go ahead and use code DARKDIVES to get, I believe it's 25% off your entire order. And this little flash sale of mine ends this Saturday, so make sure to get it while it's hot, I guess. That is so tacky to say. Sorry about that. This episode is also sponsored by Honey, the easy way to save when shopping on your iPhone or computer. Now, as the pandemic has continued to rage on, and if you can believe it, we're almost in year 3 of the pandemic, which is so unpleasant to know. But with that came the rise of shopping online. And
okay, here's a thing where he talks about this bill, the way that he talks about it. I don't know if I'm going to watch the whole thing.
Bureaucracy that's going to be produced. Every college or university shall collect from its students, faculty, staff, and other persons, whatever that means, and provide to the minister such data and other information related to the following as may be requested by the minister: the number of times support, services, complaints, resolutions, and accommodation relating to racism are requested, made, and obtained by students enrolled at or faculty or staff of the college or university, and information about those supports, any anti-racism initiatives and programs established by the college or university to promote awareness of the supports and services, the number of incidents and complaints of racism reported by students, faculty, and staff, and information about how such incidents and complaints, including how the incidents and complaints were addressed or resolved, the implementation and effectiveness of the policy. So that means and that's not just for colleges and universities.
Well, it just sounds like they're saying that we want to have data on like how seriously we're taking people, like how seriously the colleges are taking the complaints that people are leveraging against them, or the desire for some kind of conversation or implementation of like racial equality protections or something.
Have read this correctly. It's throughout the education system as a whole. So that means the establishment of a bureaucracy that is devoted to doing nothing but gathering such data and reporting it. And so all you have to do is think for about 15 seconds to imagine what that's going to mean, because systems tilt themselves to produce what is being measured.
Exactly. So, but again, where are they going with this? I mean, it is from the authoritarian regimes. You check on thought. You check on the number of complaints. And by the way, if you start to...
Well, yeah, yes. That's not like a negative, though. They want people to, we want to collect data on you basically being sensitive to black people or something, basically. It's like, yeah, this is, everybody would know that they want people to do this. Yeah, of course. That's why they're doing this. I don't know where they're getting.
Complaints on a truly hot subject. It can get very personal very quickly. There's people in their various jobs, teaching, broadcasting, business, anywhere else. If you set up an investigative structure and a reporting structure and a tabulation structure, if I want to do damage to you, and if I pick the right side of this particular context, I'm going to move you out. We cannot allow the bureaucratization of the search into people's attitudes and souls.
Yeah, of course we tilt towards what's being measured. It's just not a negative. It's not a negative thing to tilt towards what's being measured in this context, right? Like if I said we're going to start measuring how many times we kick babies in the face, all of a sudden you're probably going to see less babies getting kicked in the face. That's a good thing. Well, it depends on who you talk to. Personally, I think it might not be a good thing. You might think it's a good thing. I don't know. I don't see a problem with kicking them in the face, as long as it's not too hard, you know. But yeah, I don't really feel like listening to the rest of this. It's just some kind of babbling over something that doesn't really matter. All right, let's continue.
With that, a need for a new way to coupon, and that's where Honey steps in, because Honey is the free shopping tool.
Okay, how much is this ad read for?
Join honey.com/casket.
And are we degenerate in a profoundly threatening manner? I think the answer to that may well be yes. The idea that we are ensconced in a culture war has become a rhetorical commonplace. How serious is that war? Is it serious enough to increase the probability that Russia, say, will be motivated to invade and potentially incapacitate Ukraine merely to keep the pathological West out of that country, which is a key part of the historically Russian sphere of influence?
The culture has leapt from the depths of social media echo chambers and
I gotta see what else he has to say about that, but it sounds like he's saying that if we continue to spread Western ideology, Russia is going to have the impact of saying we need to counter that by being very aggressive against it, and we would do that by invading Ukraine. The thing is that Russia always is constantly wanting to invade Ukraine. And when we say spread Western ideology, understand that Ukraine wants to be part of NATO. It's just an agreement that they can't be, but they still want to be our ally. So it's like this country's asking us for support and for help, and then it's like, oh, well, it's a bad thing if we help them. Well, that's ridiculous. Okay, so
cable television, and has finally led to the extremely serious consequences that Jordan has been warning us about, at least according to him. February 24th, 2022 is the day that most of us will remember as the day that Russia started a large-scale invasion of the sovereign nation of Ukraine. While many reacted with shock and almost immediate disapproval of Vladimir Putin's decision and watched horrified as hospitals, schools, and civilian homes were destroyed, others had a different reaction. So back to Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel we go. Now, he starts off fine, saying that he finds Putin's actions to be unconscionable, but he quickly veers onto a new path. Sure, Russia is wrong, but he seems to sympathize with why Russia might be invading Ukraine. This reason, he says, is because of the overwhelming degeneracy of the West and Russia's desperation to return to orthodox beliefs. Our apparent degeneration has made Putin and the Russian people wary of us, and is what he used to gain support for the invasion of Ukraine. But are we degenerate, asks Peterson. Yes, he says, we are. And how does he explain this? Well, by bringing up the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson and claiming that she was nominated for sex and race over her qualifications. Sure, she was qualified, he says, but who she was trumped her background. Clearly, this was pandering by—
well, if she's qualified, then who cares? Like, here's the thing. If her sex and race made it easier for her to become whatever role she got, good for her. As long as she's qualified. But listen, I don't know the specifics, but if she was like voted into office by people because they're like, wow, I want to see a black woman in here, then who cares? Right? They said it was Congress, so people voted her in. Right? I got that right.
By the Jackson and claim— how does he explain this? Well, by bringing up the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson and claiming that she was nominated for sex and race over her—
wait, what is this for? What the fuck was she nominated for? Sorry, I thought they heard Congress. Who was she nominated by? What was she nominated for? Supreme Court Justice. Okay. So she's I'm an idiot. She's nominated to be a Supreme Court Justice, which means there's no voting for that whatsoever. My bad. Sorry about that. But she was qualified, but her being black and her being a woman was a positive. Who cares? Why is that a bad thing? It's not a bad idea to have a black— like if she's qualified, it's a good thing to have a black woman in a role with Supreme Court justices that are filled by a lot of white people, because maybe you get a little bit of a different perspective that could represent a different part of your country. Why would the fuck would that even be a bad thing?
Clearly. So yes, we are degenerate because we celebrate the historic nomination of the first black woman to the Supreme Court and her confirmation. He goes on to word vomit his common bullshit about how everyone on the left is radical and looking to destroy capitalism. Same old, same old. But is this an excuse for Putin? Not necessarily, but to him, it is the reason. Russia is merely defending itself from the degenerate West by invading a sovereign nation. He believes the war is a symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. As David French says in The Atlantic, while the West has problems—
yeah, no, it's the reality is that Russia just wants more power, and they have a dog shit fucking worldview and ideology that's not free. That's just a fact of the matter. I don't know what to tell you.
It is not degenerate by any reasonable historical measure, and there is no reasonable comparison between the virtue of NATO and Russia. Obviously, the West is not perfect, but saying that the West has become so insane that a country statistically less religious, less free, and more dangerous felt the need to invade a sovereign nation to protect itself is laughable. The question of whether countries like Canada or America are lacking the moral high ground to speak out against this is also laughable in terms of what Peterson laid out. If you want to talk about the morality of the United States, talk about our history of invading sovereign nations, or the criminal justice system, or the fact that we are one of the only developed countries in the world without mandatory paid parental leave.
Yeah, Russia's making NATO grow like crazy. Maybe. Yeah, because they're such a shit fucking country, bro. The Russian people are cool, but their country is dog shit.
Not about how we engage in identity politics. That's a non-starter. But hey, for Peterson, this was his way to prove that everything he'd been saying all along was right. He always claimed identity politics.
I knew that identity politics were destroying the world. Let's go, Miss Piggy. We have to go save everybody. Sorry.
Would lead to disaster, and this was his way of showing that his prediction just might be coming true. So of course, he saw the chance to jump, and he did. Right off a fucking cliff. Of course, these types of comments are deeply concerning, as it lends to undermining the United States' support of Ukraine and paints the country and other countries in the West of having no authority to condemn the horrific war crimes carried out by Putin. For Peterson, though, it's just par for the course. Over the years...
in his defense, it sounded like he said that it's not a good thing, but like the, I don't know, fucking the increased presence of Western countries and influence is agitating Russia. I don't really agree with that, but he's not saying that what they're doing is okay or good. It sounds like you even explicitly said that. He's just saying it's making them feel justified. And the pushback shouldn't be to just call him a Russian sympathizer. It should be to say, why does that matter more than anything else?
Lectures, predictions, and just all around
the Muppet Steak Russia.
We're going to Russia, guys. We're going over to Russia. It's better than America. Come on, Miss Piggy. Come on, Scooter.
That's a character, right?
Scooter. Fozzie Bear. Chungus.
I don't know. Who's another person?
Matilda?
I don't know.
Rhetoric have become increasingly more upsetting. And what's even worse is that people are listening to him. He has over 5 million followers on YouTube. He has joined the ranks of Ben Shapiro and others as some of the most influential people on the right. And he's even sponsored now by the Daily Wire. According to him, he isn't thrilled by his growing popularity with dangerous crowds, but that's certainly not what it seems like. To me, he seems like a man that got his 15 minutes of fame and became addicted. Certainly.
Is what you're talking about? Kermit in Russia?
I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in violence.
Okay.
We got him. I don't believe in violence, Miss Piggy. But we have to. We have to defend Russia from these Ukrainians that are destroying their beautiful culture of hating gay people. Gotta get him. Get him.
Woo! There you go, Jordan. You got him.
He is making more money now than he ever did in the world of academic fame and became addicted. Certainly, he is making more money now than he ever did in the world of academia.
Maybe it's a grift. I just feel like Jordan's gone down a fucking crazy path.
And speaking to a wider audience than he ever could have imagined. What's that old saying again? What is it? Power corrupts completely? Something like that? Well, that sure as hell seems like what's happening here. And despite his constant rambling of pseudoscientific bullshit, people are listening, and his power and influence just keeps growing. As The Guardian puts it, Peterson's wave is unlikely to come crashing down anytime soon. But with all of that being said, that is where I'm going to end today's episode.
All right, cool. Interesting video. Yeah, there's plenty of things to criticize about Jordan. I don't know. Something about this content creator. Something about that content creator that makes me go, that's a little suspicious, like a character from the popularity of us.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.